Africa. Just the name alone carries 1,000 different images in the minds of people across the world. But when you ask Americans what they really think of Africa, the answers often reveal a shocking truth. The land that gave birth to humanity, the land of gold, diamonds, oil, music, rhythm, culture, and kings, is often reduced in American imagination to a single word: poverty. And that is where this story begins. Because Africa, in the eyes of so many Americans, is not the Africa that Africans know, nor the Africa that history tells, nor the Africa that the world desperately needs to understand. Today, we pull back the curtain, we expose the myths, we break the chains of misunderstanding, and we ask a question that could change everything. Africa, according to Americans, what do they really see? And why does it matter? For decades, movies, music, and media in America have painted Africa as a land of endless struggles, endless deserts, endless wars, and endless hunger. When an average American hears Africa, the first thought is often a child with no food, a dusty road with broken huts, a mother crying for help. But is that all Africa is? Is that the whole story? Of course not. Yet this picture is so deeply planted that many Americans grow up believing Africa is one big poor country rather than a continent of 54 nations, each with its own wealth, languages, heroes, cities, and future. This ignorance is not accidental. It was built carefully, layer by layer, through centuries of colonial propaganda, Hollywood stereotypes, charity commercials designed to raise dollars, and news channels that show only the tragedies while ignoring the triumphs. And the shocking truth is this: many Americans do not know Africa. They only know a story about Africa, a story told to them for a reason. Imagine being in New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago and asking random Americans, what comes to your mind when you hear Africa? You will hear things like lions, giraffes, safaris, poverty, famine, corruption, maybe Nelson Mandela, maybe warlords, maybe Ebola. But how many will say Lagos, a city with more people than New York? How many will say Kigali, the cleanest city in the world? How many will mention Accra, a booming tech hub, or Nairobi, the Silicon Savannah? How many will remember Africa is not just survival, it is innovation, it is the future? The answer is painful, not many, because Africa has been hidden from them. And here lies the great tragedy. When Americans misunderstand Africa, they misunderstand themselves too. Because Africa is not just Africa, it is the root of humanity, the soul of the Black diaspora, the foundation of global culture, and the key to the world's tomorrow. Now let us go deeper. Why does America see Africa this way? Why does the richest country on earth continue to look at Africa through the eyes of pity rather than respect? The answer is power. For centuries, Africa has been robbed of people through slavery, robbed of land through colonialism, robbed of resources through exploitation. And when you rob someone, you must justify it. You must create a story that says they are weak, they are poor, they cannot survive without us. That story was told to generations of Americans until it became the only truth they knew. Hollywood movies showed Africa as wild and primitive. News channels only appeared when there was war or disease. Charity ads begged Americans to save the starving African child. And so an entire nation was conditioned to see Africa as a victim, never as a victor. But Africa is rising. And here is the part that will shock many Americans. Africa is not waiting for pity. Africa is not begging for handouts. Africa is building its own destiny. In Nigeria, fintech companies are transforming global banking. In Rwanda, technology is driving development faster than ever seen before. In Ghana, education is empowering the next generation. In South Africa, space agencies are preparing satellites. In Kenya, digital innovations are feeding millions. This is the Africa that is rarely shown on American TV. This is the Africa that does not fit the old story. And yet, if Americans opened their eyes, they would see it clearly. Africa is no longer a continent of victims. It is a continent of visionaries. And here is where curiosity strikes hardest. What happens when Americans finally realize the truth about Africa? What happens when they see that Africa is not behind, but ahead in many ways? That Africa has the youngest population in the world, bursting with energy, creativity, and dreams? That Africa holds the world's richest natural resources, from cobalt for electric cars to rare minerals for smartphones? That Africa is not the dark continent, but the shining future of the planet? If Americans wake up to this reality, the entire balance of power shifts. No longer will they look down on Africa, they will look across to Africa. No longer will they think Africa needs saving, they will realize Africa is leading. And that is why this conversation is so dramatic, so urgent, so emotional, because the world cannot afford a blind America, not when Africa is rising to its rightful place. So let us break down some of the myths. Myth 1, Africa is poor. Truth, Africa is rich, unimaginably rich, but its wealth has been stolen and hidden. Myth 2, Africa is dangerous. Truth, every continent has crime, but Africa also has some of the safest and most welcoming nations. Myth 3, Africa is backward. Truth, Africa is leaping into the future with digital revolutions that even America is learning from. Myth 4, Africa is helpless. Truth, Africa has survived slavery, colonization, exploitation, and still stands tall. Does that look like helplessness or strength? These myths were fed to Americans like daily bread, but today they are being shattered. And once shattered, they can never be rebuilt. Think about it. When a young American grows up believing Africa is nothing but poverty, what happens when he meets an African engineer building robots in Accra? When a young American woman grows up thinking African women are always powerless, what happens when she sees women leading nations, women running corporations, women driving movements from Cairo to Cape Town? Shock, amazement, inspiration, and slowly the old lies begin to collapse. That is why this story matters, because changing the way Americans see Africa is not just about pride, it is about power. It is about justice. It is about shaping the future of global relationships. But here is the emotional truth. Africans themselves must tell their story. Americans will never fully understand Africa until Africans rise and speak with one voice. That is why YouTube, social media, art, music, and film are so powerful today. For the first time, Africans are not waiting for CNN, BBC, or Hollywood to describe them. They are showing the world their own cities, their own culture, their own progress. And when Americans see that, they cannot look away. They begin to ask, why were we never told this? Why did no one show us this Africa before? And that curiosity leads to change. Now let me turn to you, the listener. If you are watching this, you are part of the revolution. You are part of the movement to rewrite the story of Africa. You are part of the voice that says enough is enough. Africa is not a victim. Africa is a victor. I ask you, do not just watch this video and move on. Share it, comment, subscribe, join the movement. Let Americans hear not just the old story, but the new story. Let them see Africa not with eyes of pity, but with eyes of respect, because the future depends on it. And here is the dramatic twist. While Americans are slowly waking up to the truth about Africa, others are moving faster. China is investing billions. Russia is building alliances. The Middle East is strengthening ties. Even Europe, after centuries of exploitation, is now desperate to hold on to Africa. But America? America is still stuck in old images, old myths, old stories. If they do not wake up, they will be left behind. And that, my friends, is the greatest irony of all. America, the so-called leader of the free world, might lose the future simply because it refused to see Africa as it truly is. Africa, according to Americans, has always been a story of weakness. But the new Africa is a story of strength. Africa, according to Americans, has always been a story of poverty. But the real Africa is a story of riches. Africa, according to Americans, has always been a story of despair. But the living Africa is a story of hope. And hope is more powerful than fear. Hope is more powerful than propaganda. Hope is more powerful than lies. That is why this video matters. That is why your voice matters. That is why Africa matters. So the next time you hear an American speak about Africa as if it is nothing but struggle, remember this. They are not describing Africa. They are describing the story they were taught. But stories can change. And today, right now, we are changing it. Africa is not waiting for permission. Africa is not waiting for validation. Africa is standing tall. Africa is moving forward. Africa is ready to lead. And when Americans finally see that, the world will never be the same again. And to every American watching this, I ask you, open your eyes, look again. Do not settle for the story you were told. Search deeper, listen to African voices, visit African cities, see the truth with your own eyes. Because once you see it, got it.